I have done 2 books for teens, both suggested by librarians. And actually, the first book of poetry for children, Confetti, was suggested by a librarian who came up to me at a conference in Kentucky and said, "Why is it you write poetry for adults and you've never written poetry for children?" And I hadn't even thought about it. And I went home and I thought, well, that's a good idea. I could write poetry for children. And so I've enjoyed that greatly. Well, in the same way, a California librarian came up to me one day and said, "I have a lot of Latino teens. I really don't have poetry for teens, a book that I can share with them. Why don't you put one together?" I had written my first 3 books for adults with Arte Publico Press at the University of Houston. And so I contacted the publisher and said, what if I selected poems from Chants, Borders, and Communion that I thought would work for teens? And he, like a good publisher, said, yes, and what if you wrote 6 or 7 new poems? And I said, and what if I begin the book with a letter to teens? And so that became my own true name. So these were primarily poems that had been previously written, not all, but primarily. Okay, then years pass, and a librarian in Texas said to me, well, you've only written 1 book for teens. Why don't you do a book of love poems for teens? And I burst out laughing, and I said, love poems for teens? And she said, yes, you know, teens love love poems. It happened to be a year when I was visiting a lot of middle schools and high schools, and so I started asking teachers and librarians as I traveled around the country, and one of them said the magic sentence. She said, yes, boys love them, they copy them and sign their names. And I thought that was a temptation I could not resist. My editor then said, who's Nancy Hinkle at Knopf for that book, and she said, well, how about using some poetic forms? Don't you think teachers and librarians would appreciate it if you used some poetic forms in the book? And initially I thought, but it was a wonderful suggestion because it meant I had to revisit the forms. And then it was fun to say, well, here's a great form. I think I'd like to use it. What topic would lend itself to it?